YouTube vinyl community, John and Yoko fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens, and we are here today to talk about John and Yoko's third experimental album together, Wedding Album, released on Apple in 1969. This was the third in their series of their unfinished music experimental kind of phase. The first being this guy here, two versions, which I only have on cassette. I don't own it on a record yet. And then Life with the Lions was the second one. They followed this one up really closely with Wedding Album. So the original album for this came in a gigantic box set. There was a copy of the marriage certificate, pictures, a picture of a cake, a lot of paraphernalia that went on with it in a giant, nice box. And it just got reissued for the first time, I think probably ever on vinyl, since it came out through Secretly Canadian and Chimera Music. Sean Lennon did a great video of unboxing it and playing it in the background. So that was really cool. This copy I have, it just happens to be just the record. There's no box for this one, which is fine. Someday I'll find another one. This is also a little bit well-loved on the cover. The record plays fine, but the jacket's a bit beat. For those of you who have never heard a John and Yoko album from the 60s, it's a trip. It's definitely an experiment. It's definitely something that can test your patience if you're not open to hearing something like this, because we become, as humanity, we become accustomed to what society has told us that music should sound like, and what a pop song should sound like, and what aesthetic sounds are, and things that are pleasing to us. If we spent money on them, we should be rewarded for having spent money on something that sounds good to us. This is an album that is an experiment, and if you bought it, you're going into the world of John and Yoko to hear what their experiments could be, what their unfinished music is, what their ideas and thoughts and aesthetic were all about. When this was recorded, they had just done the Bed In for Peace, and just tried to spread the message of, look, the world's falling apart right now. There's a lot of bad things happening. There's violence everywhere. We're not trying to preach, but we're trying to say that we're part of the younger generation, and that we're here with the kids, and we're here to say peace can happen. Their famous slogan, war is over if you want it. And I feel like we still live in that society today. 50 years later, if you watch the Bed Peace movie, so much of what they're talking about applies to right now, which is terrifying that we haven't grown as humans. That's a whole other conversation, but this album's fairly interesting because one side of it is music. The other side of it is an interview with bits and pieces of music in there as well. So like I said, if you've never heard one of their albums before, it's a lot of either tape loops or them screaming or making collages of sound effects and putting together an idea or just something that was so far out and something you've never heard before that it kind of blows your mind to give it a listen and see what you think about it. It's not something you're going to put on all the time and enjoy. Well, maybe you will. I don't know. For instance, the first track on here is called John and Yoko, and it's 23 minutes of both of their heartbeats recorded, and then them saying each other's names back and forth in as many patterns as you can think humanly possible. From sultry whispering to screaming each other's names in back and forth call and response pattern. And it's interesting. It's something that definitely captures your interest. Again, I'm not sure how often I'm going to put this record on, but for the sake of doing a review, it was fun to hear it. I haven't come across this album too many times in my life, so to actually finally own it was pretty cool. But it's interesting that they did a heartbeat on this thing, because they did a heartbeat on Life with the Lions, which was their first son together, who unfortunately didn't make it. So it's interesting they revisited the heartbeat theme. So one side, I feel like, of the argument, if you were to put this album on, you'd be like, alright, it's just them saying their names over and over again, and it's just them with heartbeats underneath it. I don't get it. This is stupid. Turn it off. The other side of it is like, they're recording their literal heartbeats, thinking about each other as they say each other's names, and how that makes their heartbeats feel, and creating a moment, creating a time that they can listen back on and be like, yeah, that's the way my heartbeat sounded when we first started going out. We first started making these projects together. that was so exciting. That was us then. That's what it sounded like. Um, and it's pretty far out. I mean, when you really think about it, it's some far out stuff, but it's also just human nature. I mean, we all say each other's names in different ways, depending on how we're trying to talk to them. If we're trying to yell from across the room, or if we're trying to whisper something nice to them, and your heart is affected by what's happening at the same time. So, for me, it's a captive. I'm a captive audience because I find it fascinating to see, like, okay, they took their own heartbeats and made a rhythm out of it, a drum track out of it. This nonstop life force, the human body is the instrument, which is kind of weird, kind of cool. Um, and then to hear them literally take their names from every range of how you can say someone's name is also probably a testament to their own patience. But very interesting, definitely an interesting track. Because one of those things you put on is let it play and kind of do something else, or sit there and listen to it. But it definitely captures your attention because it's so unlike anything you may have heard before. Very interesting track. That's all side one, and then side two is called Amsterdam, which features a handful of different tracks um, of them either goofing around with a guitar or interviews. But a really early version of "Let's Hope for Peace" with Yoko singing it. John actually does a bit of "Good Night" from the White Album. He does a song called "Goodbye Amsterdam." Yoko sings a couple lines about "Stay in bed, grow your hair." So there is a bit of music on this one with some guitar, just for them being in bed during the bed-in. The interview is fascinating. I thought that was really, really interesting to hear. A lot. If you've seen the Bed Peace movie, if you've watched interviews with them at that time, it's probably nothing you haven't heard before. But it's still interesting to hear them talk about peace and activism and human rights, and speaking out against violence that's rampant all over the world all the time. And again, 50 years ago, and it's still happening. This world is still having its awful troubles, and people are still trying to figure out ways to bring each other together and just peace and love, man. It's easy. Um, there was one moment in here where Yoko says the phrase "Back to the Future," and I'm like, holy crap! Did Yoko invent the phrase "Back to the Future"? Because they were talking about the present, then they went back in time, talking about World War II and what was happening with the Holocaust and all that. She says, "Let's go back to the future." And I was like, holy crap, like, did Yoko Ono invent the phrase "Back to the Future"? Maybe not, but pretty damn cool. Um, so yeah, that's interesting to hear. And Yoko's got some fantastic points that she makes about comparing the 60s to what was happening um, during World War II, but also just around the world at the time with the riots and everything that was happening. And the late 60s was a very violent time. Vietnam, everything else. Um, and that's the thing, man. You could play that record right now and be like, yeah, this is happening right now. Like, this world is so divided about everything. And there's violence everywhere constantly, whether it's emotional or physical or whatever. This record stands up in 2019. Um, and in a sense, you do have to contextualize this album a bit. John and Yoko were newly together at this point. They'd been together for like a year and a half or something. It was a fairly new thing, so they were still in their, I'd almost call it a honeymoon period. I mean, even though that doesn't last a year, usually it's like a 6-month time period. But they were enamored with each other. They were enamored with the idea of creating content with each other and seeing what they can do as a unit. John having come from the musical Beatles background, and Yoko having come from the avant-garde performance art kind of stuff background. Their two worlds combining and trying to make something of it are fascinating. And they've said before that if we could be the world's clowns, we'll do it for peace. So in that sense, this is a document of two people who were just a little boy and a little girl trying to change the whole wide world. Isolation. Fascinating document of the time. Probably not essential to anyone's collection, but if you're really into following everything John and Yoko did, in that sense, yeah, pick it up. It's definitely an interesting listen. Here's the back cover here. Hair piece, bed piece, Amsterdam, John and Yoko. Good picture of the two of them in the bed there. And it's a gatefold. So you get a nice big picture of them hanging out in bed together there with a room full of interviewers. Very cool. And I'll show you the record here too, which is in really good shape. Only a couple of scuffs on it. But yeah, side one is just John and Yoko. And side two, Amsterdam. So I was trying to think about how I should rate this thing, because it's not really music. It's not really like an album. It's just kind of a document of the time, which is kind of interesting. So for what it is, and I think the messages they were trying to get across, and how it still stands up with a lot of their points and opinions and views, I'd probably give this thing like an 8. You know, just based on the opinions and the worldview that it expresses. I mean, you can't really call it music, so it's easy for someone to be like, oh, it's just John and Yoko screaming at each other, 1 star. Like, I don't know, you can't really just give it that kind of rating. You gotta go a little bit deeper with this one, I think, because it stands up on its own as its own entity. It's not meant to be music, it's meant to be something else. It's meant to make you think and feel and express something and go to a part of your brain that you don't normally access and see how that makes you react. So it's more of a cerebral thing more than anything. So if it makes you feel something and if you react to it, let me know what you think. So I'm going to say like an 8 on this thing, because it definitely stands out. You remember it. You'll never forget something like this. It's always going to be like, oh yeah, I remember that John, Yoko. Like, I'll always remember that. So yeah, I'm going to go with an 8. John Yoko's wedding album. So let me know what you guys think about this thing. Have you heard it? You know, I think a lot of it is on YouTube. It's probably on Spotify and stuff. But if you own it, let's talk about the box set and the reissue. If you've picked that up, I probably won't pick that up anytime soon unless I find it for cheap enough. But that's it. My name is Giggens. This has been John Yoko, wedding album, 1969, Apple Records. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.